Welcome back to this final part of Murder with Friends. Today we're talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm joined by Jason Carter. Now, Jason, in part 2, we just touched on cannibalism and how that was sort of what he evolved to. He wanted to keep a part of his victims, but let's delve even deeper into how he was killing these people, how he got these victims, the gay scene in Milwaukee, just all of that stuff. I think we should break it down a little bit more before we get into the walls closing in on Jeffrey and his subsequent arrest.
Sure, well, Jeffrey was attracted to things that were the antithesis of who he was. You will find that some people say he was attracted to all men, that he liked an array of different men. But if you look at his victims, and Jeffrey is even on record saying himself that he was attracted to darker skin, men of color, Asian men, again, people that were not like him. So he starts first frequenting bathhouses and arcades and places that have gay material, pornographic material, and he uses. He's a very charming guy, very good looking guy. He's a slick talker. So he lures these young victims with promises of money and photography. And you have these victims that are homeless on the street that have been disowned by their own families, looking to latch on to something, needing that security. And Jeffrey, by all accounts, seemed like he could offer that. He's offering money, he's offering a place to come to, food. Upon luring his victims in, he would drug their drinks with sleeping pills to get them submissive, and then he would rape them, take advantage of them. And sometimes he didn't kill all of his victims, but that was how he would get them, how he would prey on them, and how he would secure his prey.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the walls beginning to close in, because there were some near misses where the police were aware. First of all, he'd already served a year for sexual assault, second-degree sexual assault. Let's not forget that.
Right.
But there were also some near misses where the police were in contact with Jeffrey Dahmer and a victim, and what happened? Let him go.
They just, and so you're talking about the case of the 14-year-old victim who escaped.
Naked in the street,
bleeding anally, and Jeffrey had tried
incoherent
because Jeffrey had drugged him and tried to drill into his head and pour this acid to make him a sex zombie, which we'll touch on as well. And you have a woman who makes a 911 call. The cops show up.
Sandra Smith
absolutely sees Jeffrey with the young victim, and Jeffrey plays it off very, very, very slick. Oh, it just makes me so mad how slick this guy is.
Yeah.
Saying that this is his gay lover, who, if you look at the boy, doesn't even look remotely close to being over 18. But the officers laugh it up. They're like, oh, ha, fine, yeah, sure, whatever, and hand him back over to Jeffrey.
Well, also what I think is interesting, and there was a podcast that I listened to that sort of touched on this as well, is that the two women that found this boy were women of color.
Yes.
And then Jeffrey comes out sort of this white savior. He's like, oh, this is my lover, here's some photos, here's my ID. And the police didn't give any credence to what these women were saying. Like, oh, we found this boy terrified, running naked in the streets, bleeding anally. And they're like, well, I mean, it's probably, but the white guy says it's his lover, and then here he has some photos that aren't sketchy at all. Like what? Like why wasn't there that sort of litmus test? Like why didn't they do their due diligence? And part of me wonders if they just didn't. They were like, oh, it's a gay couple. This is what 1991. The ghost of Jeffrey Dahmer
is in the studio.
Something just dropped. It makes you wonder if they were so uncomfortable with homosexuality at that time that they were like, you just do you, like just take him, he's your lover, cool. We don't want to be involved.
Grace, you should absolutely wonder that, because there was an article that came out that interviewing the two officers, and they were completely victims in this. They said it wasn't like we just dumped this kid back into the arms of a murderous monster, but that's exactly what you did. And it's not that far-fetched to think that they didn't want to touch the gay theme, the gay narrative with the 10-foot pole back in the early 90s. A lot of people didn't.
Yeah, and you'll still see that when you do interviews with the friends and family of the victims. Sometimes a lot of them have a hard time coming to terms with the fact that he wasn't soliciting people to hang out and have fun with him, like
at
as
the
buddies.
Orange Julius.
Yeah, like there was absolutely a sexual tension that he did express in some way, shape, or form. At the very least, it was a creepy ask of friendship that that people did were somehow interested in. There was, if you were a little curious, I would say 90% of the time, if you followed Jeffrey Dahmer for his ask of modeling photos.
Yeah, and I mean Jeffrey even admits to the homosexuality. There's so many. As we go on, we'll get into Jeffrey being forthright with information.
Right.
But I mean, it's clear as day. It's clear
right.
as day.
And so let's get there.
Let's go there, G.
Let's go there. So Tracy Edwards is the whistleblower on Jeffrey Dahmer on July 22nd, 1991, and he encounters. He has an absolutely horrific encounter. It plays out like a horror movie because he had to, once he realized what was going on and that Jeffrey Dahmer was trying to kill him, he had to win back his trust, and they had sort of an evening affair together where it went from Jeffrey Dahmer threatening him and putting a knife to his throat, and then Tracy having to sort of win him over, like, no, we can hang out, it's cool, we'll watch The Exorcist, it's not a big deal, and having to hang out with this guy that had already made an attempt on his life. I mean, it's really terrifying, and I would actually encourage you guys on YouTube, you can find his full testimony in court from Tracy Edwards. It's about an hour long, it's worth the watch, it's incredibly compelling, court TV, so check that out. And now let's talk about what was found in apartment 213, because this is why Jeffrey Dahmer became so infamous, so horrific. I'm just gonna read this out. This is from forensicoutreach.com. A total of 4 severed heads were found in Dahmer's refrigerator and freezer alone, along with a box of baking soda that barely covered the scent of decomposition rampant in the room. 2 human hearts were also discovered here with a tray at the bottom to collect any blood that dripped in. In the freezer, investigators found frozen meat galore, a full human torso, a bag of human organs, and some remnants of flesh, frozen, stuck to ice. Next, we step from the kitchen through a door fitted with a deadbolt lock into the bedroom, which had a closet and a bathroom attached. In the closet, an innocuous-looking stock pot was opened to reveal its dastardly contents as being even more severed body parts. 2 skulls were also found on the shelves of the closet. Here, Dahmer's tools of choice were also discovered. Containers of ethyl alcohol, chloroform, and formaldehyde weighed down the shelves. Disturbing male genitalia preserved in formaldehyde were also found here. So that is what people talk about when you talk about what was found in apartment 213, why it becomes so infamous in true crime. Jason, you mentioned sex zombies, and I think briefly let's talk about how the preservation of bodies and how he was using these body parts for him, but also what he was trying to create with his victims.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the mannequin. He in control. I mean, I can't stress how much Jeffrey needed control because his life had been out of control. Parents, the alcoholism, he just couldn't get it together. So the sex zombies, when we say a sex zombie, Jeffrey would drill a hole into the victim's head, pour acid to kind of give the person a lobotomy to make him submissive to a degree, and that ended up.
That's what he thought. I mean,
right? He used hot water sometimes. Jeffrey, for being charming, he really wasn't that smart, but he was smart. It's like one of those things, like idiot savant. It was about control, and then also he wanted to keep a piece of that person. He felt that if he had a piece of that person, it would live on for forever. That's why he skinned. He had pieces of flesh, the male genitalia, which harkens back to him almost losing, if you will, his own genitalia. There was power in that. It all boiled down to power with Jeffrey.
Yeah. And obviously when the police found his apartment, it was sort of like with Ed Gein, as we talked about in season 1. You find Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, you found Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment.
Yes.
And he cooperated with the police almost immediately.
The jig was up.
Yeah, the jig was up. And let's take a look actually at a clip I found just sort of illustrating how cooperative he was with law enforcement.
This was a fairly unique crime scene and autopsy for a forensic pathologist because we had immediate access to Dahmer. Dahmer was talking to and conversing with law enforcement. He had basically admitted his guilt and culpability and was assisting law enforcement in the investigation. When we found an injury, we would call up law enforcement and then they would inquire of Dahmer what we found and corroborate our findings, which is a very unique situation for a forensic pathologist to have. Immediate confirmation of what you're seeing.
So on July 25th, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer is indicted on 4 counts of murder, but that would increase to 11 before his trial. Now, the interesting thing, excuse me, about this trial, and I would again encourage you to go to YouTube because you can see a lot of the testimony in full online. Not sure who uploaded it, but cool that you found that. Dahmer, what they were trying to plead was if he was insane or not, and how that would affect the sentencing. And he was found to be sane because there was way too much premeditation and cover up for this to really effectively plead an insanity defense. Really, what the I guess the nail in the coffin for him was Tracy Edwards' testimony, because he did spend that intimate time with Dahmer and was able to talk about how he was, what his mind state was when he was trying to kill him.
Right.
An interesting thing about Tracy Edwards is that he's actually now serving in the Columbia Correctional Institution. I believe he is. I'm not sure if he's passed away, because he also killed someone. After the trial, his life prior was not great, and then after it just really took a nosedive, and he threw a guy over a bridge. And I'm reading news articles about he was the hero that got Dahmer, and then he just sort of descended. Yeah.
So wanted to touch real quick on the necrophilia, because in the insanity, the prosecution, the defense wasn't smart enough to know that necrophilia wasn't considered a mental disorder that could prove insanity. So, and also Jeffrey Dahmer had cameras and closed circuit TV. So everything he did was premeditated, from the drugging to, so an insane person is one could argue that they're that methodical, but in Jeffrey's case, it was like there's no way you're gonna get away with insanity, especially with all the steps you've taken to do these crimes.
Exactly, so he is sentenced to life in prison on February 15th, 1992, and by 1994, November 28th, he would be killed, beaten by Christopher Scarver, who said that Jesus told him to do it. And Christopher actually killed another person that was on work duty with Jeffrey Dahmer that day. And I think what we've talked about a lot today is Jeffrey Dahmer, and if maybe he'd spoken out about these urges, maybe if he'd sought help, what could have been different. But in his own words, Jeffrey says that if he had spoken out, nothing would have changed. So let's hear from Dahmer himself right now.
Did you ever consider talking to your parents, to your dad, about homosexuality? Is that something that you felt you could ever raise?
Early on, I really didn't know that much about it myself. All I knew was that it was something that was to be kept hush-hush, not talked about, not even thought about. So I just kept it all within me and never talked about sexual issues at all, really, with anybody.
Do you think if you had been able to talk about that in a more open way with your dad, for instance, that it would have might have broken this veil of secrecy and enabled you to keep yourself from going down that road?
I don't know exactly what, if anything, would have ever kept me from going down that road. Talking about it, I don't think would have made that much difference, because like I said, there were things going on in my head that I would have never opened up and talked about with anybody.
All right, Jason, thoughts on that? He says he doesn't think it would have made a difference. Your response?
I agree. I think that the demons that resided in Jeffrey Dahmer were more powerful. He was driven by a more sinister force, whatever you want to call it, a higher being. Something inside him would have eventually come to the forefront and still carried out these heinous crimes. So yeah, he could have easily, and also Lionel took a lot of guilt in that he wasn't more aware of his son's mental state. So maybe maybe Lionel wouldn't have been open to hearing that from Jeffrey, that he was gay, because a lot of people felt that the whole gay element would have worked against him, that his family would have moved further from him. So we'll never know, but I personally feel like things would have been business as usual for Jeffrey.
Yeah, it's so hard to say. It's so easy when you look at these cases to say woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
What would have happened differently, but we'll just never know. But that is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. That is as much as we can cover, and there's so much more to his story.
So much
and
more.
People are always going to be fascinated. He is one of the most prolific serial killers, and they're even coming out with a movie this year called My Friend Dahmer, and it'll be interesting to see how they portray Dahmer's early years. But now we want to toss it to you guys in the comment section below. This was one of those cases, one of those dark figures that you had requested. So what is something about Jeffrey Dahmer that fascinated you or that really unsettled you? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and we will be back with more episodes of Murder with Friends.